Hello, friends. Tonight, we begin with a decision that Pentagon officials have described as game-changing. It may be the most consequential shift in American policy since the Ukraine war began. Donald Trump has done what Joe Biden avoided for 3 full years. Not partially, not with conditions, but completely. This week, the Trump administration approved a decision that crossed a red line the Biden White House had refused to touch, out of fear of escalation, fear of a Russian response, and fear of consequences that never actually arrived. But the moment that authorization came through, the Kremlin's reaction was anything but routine. Panic spread inside Moscow. The Russian Foreign Ministry issued emergency statements. Senior military commanders were summoned to the Kremlin without delay. State-controlled media abruptly shifted into damage control mode. All of this happened because Washington finally approved the one move Moscow had spent years trying to prevent: unrestricted long-range drone strikes deep inside Russian territory using American technology. Tonight, we break down exactly what Trump approved, why Biden refused, and why Russia's panicked response reveals everything about who truly holds the leverage in this war. Today's developments mark a turning point that intelligence agencies across the United States, NATO security planners, and Western defense analysts had long anticipated, yet hoped would not materialize so abruptly and so quietly. This was not a shift preceded by months of public strategic posturing, prolonged diplomatic warnings, or escalating military rhetoric dominating television screens. Instead, it emerged without formal announcements, without press conferences, and without public ultimatums. History shows that some of the most consequential geopolitical shifts begin this way, in silence. Not ordinary silence, but a calculated and deliberate quiet that immediately triggers alarm bells within intelligence communities on both sides of the Atlantic. The earliest indicators did not appear in headlines, but in data. Communication patterns began to change unexpectedly. Diplomatic schedules that had followed predictable rhythms were suddenly disrupted, and long-standing routines were quietly postponed or altered without explanation. Analysts noted that when the public visibility of Ukraine's top leadership dropped sharply, it became evident that something significant was unfolding. This was not routine wartime discretion, but a focused and controlled strategic silence. A distinction intelligence professionals recognize instantly. Within hours, senior U.S. intelligence officials were summoned for emergency briefings. The picture forming did not suggest chaos or collapse. On the contrary, it indicated preparation, coordination, and a recalibration of strategic posture that had not been publicly disclosed or fully shared even with close allies. At the center of this shift stood Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. For more than 2 years, Zelensky's public strategy had remained remarkably consistent. Unequivocal resistance, clearly defined red lines, no compromise on territorial integrity, no concessions, and a rejection of ambiguity. This consistency became one of Ukraine's greatest strategic assets, sustaining Western support and preserving Allied unity. Suddenly, without advance signals, that pattern fractured. Intelligence analysts began focusing less on what was being said and more on what was not. Regular statements slowed. Scheduled appearances were quietly deferred, and certain diplomatic engagements moved from direct channels to intermediaries. Even Zelensky's internal advisory circle appeared to narrow, concentrating decision-making within a smaller, tightly controlled group. This was not hesitation. It was focus. Behind the scenes, Ukrainian officials began exploring subjects that had long been politically untouchable in public discourse. These discussions were not about weapons deliveries or battlefield tactics, but about potential end states of the war, future scenarios, and long-term consequences. This was the moment Washington's concern deepened. When a wartime leader begins examining paths once considered entirely closed, it alters not only Allied strategy, but also the adversary's perceptions. The central fear within U.S. intelligence circles was how Moscow would interpret this shift. History demonstrates that when the Kremlin senses weakness, it does not retreat, it escalates. In response to these indicators, the CIA moved swiftly. There were no public warnings, no speeches, no press releases. Instead, something far more serious occurred. According to reliable sources, CIA Director William Burns authorized an urgent message to be conveyed to Moscow through intelligence channels that remain open even when formal diplomatic ties are strained. These channels are activated only under exceptional circumstances, and when they are, it signals gravity. Burns's message was direct and immediate. It was not an offer of negotiation, nor an invitation to compromise, but a warning rooted in restraint. U.S. intelligence assessments suggested a real danger that Russia might interpret Ukraine's adjusted posture as vulnerability. Washington sought to make clear that any attempt to exploit this moment strategically or militarily would be met with a response more severe than before. This was deterrence delivered privately, not through public theatrics. William Burns' role is critical, as he is among the few U.S. officials with extensive experience dealing directly with Russian leadership. He understands the Kremlin's mindset and how messages are interpreted within its power structures. When Burns communicates through these channels, Moscow understands the message carries approval from the highest levels of the U.S. government. Following this warning, American intelligence posture shifted rapidly. Surveillance deployments were adjusted, satellite coverage over Russian military regions intensified, and signals intelligence collection accelerated. These were not symbolic actions, but measures taken only when confrontation risks are deemed credible. Simultaneously, the Pentagon quietly advanced certain military preparations, while publicly declining to offer details. European capitals were also notified through secure channels. London, Berlin, Paris, and Warsaw received the same message. This was a sensitive moment, and any public disunity could present Moscow with an opportunity. What makes this moment especially volatile is the pressure Vladimir Putin is currently facing within Russia itself. Military commanders are operating under sustained strain, as the costs of the war have exceeded early projections by a significant margin. Sanctions continue to erode economic resilience, and while public dissent remains tightly managed, tolerance is not infinite. In moments like these, history shows that leaders often search for opportunities to reassert strength rather than appear flexible. Intelligence analysts fear that Putin may interpret Ukraine's evolving posture not as an opening for diplomacy, but as confirmation that sustained pressure is producing results. If that belief takes hold, escalation becomes more likely than compromise. That is precisely the outcome the CIA's warning sought to prevent. Yet the situation is more complex than it appears on the surface. Some analysts believe Zelensky's recalibration is not a retreat, but a test. By signaling limited flexibility without formally conceding anything, Ukraine may be attempting to